Welcome, everybody. Well, three biologists gain attention this week for a Nobel Prize in Medicine. We meet a computer engineer whose work could cure our high-tech economy of a serious memory problem. We'll explain in a moment. Also today, a forgotten cathedral, a grand Negro Leagues baseball stadium in Paterson, New Jersey. Then a local community we don't hear much about, the Filipino Americans in the New York area, the culture, the politics in their History Month, plus in our public intellectual segment, how reading great fiction can serve you in real life. First, that silicon snag. Ever heard of Moore's Law? It's not really a law, but a 1965 prediction that computers would double in capacity every couple of years because cheap transistors would keep getting smaller. Well, it's been a remarkably accurate prediction until recently, but the doubling ain't happening anymore. Technical barriers. But Professor Milos Popovic and his team at the University of Colorado, in parallel with MIT researchers, think they have found a solution that could keep us consumers doing what every manufacturer from Apple to Toshiba counts on our doing, scrapping our ancient two-year-old phones and laptops for faster new ones. Milos Popovic joins us via Skype from Boulder, Colorado. Thank you for coming on our program. Hello from New York.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Moore's Law ain't the law anymore?
No, it's been, I guess, scaling for the last maybe 30, 40 years, but about 2005 or so, microprocessors basically stopped gaining from the fact that transistors get smaller and started being limited in design by the fact that these smaller and smaller transistors could not be switched faster because they would melt if you did. So they weren't running out of speed anymore, but it was a power limitation that kicked in.
So you're trying to make computers faster by using light waves?
That's right, yeah. So you can solve the part of the energy efficiency problem by communicating between microchips using light and building optical devices into a microprocessor.
How does that work? Can you give us a basic sense?
Sure. So in your laptop, you have a microprocessor and you have a memory chip. And the microprocessor tries to, for example, pick up a web page. So, it'll download it from the internet and it'll store the information in the memory. So the memory basically goes over an electrical wire that's on the motherboard of the computer. And so what we're trying to do is replace that electrical connection by an optical communication link. So you have basically an optical device inside the microchip that will imprint electrical ones and zeros, electrical bits of information onto laser light. And that goes over an optical fiber to the memory chip, which in turn will have optical devices built inside to receive this information.
How much faster can computers be than they are today?
Well, that's the beauty of Moore's Law. So you think, I guess when I started in grade, I don't know, when I was 6 years old, the first IBM PC was 4.7 megahertz in speed, and nowadays you're talking a few gigahertz, so that's a factor of 1,000. So I guess we never get tired of more computational power.
But what does that actually mean to the average user? Because I don't feel like my pages load any more quickly, or I can, surf from thing to thing any more quickly. It's just that the computers are able to take more and more complicated things, different kinds of images and videos and stuff like that, at the same speed that we used to be able to take text. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what you do with additional computational power is, I guess people come up with new things to do with more computational power, and one of the things that stopped being true about laptops is that you can put them on a lap, right? They get pretty warm these days, as do phones. So that's in part due to this power consumption issue. And I guess one thing that using optics in processors can do is reduce that power. The other is enable you to go even faster. And so who knows what people come up with, I guess, 3D video on a phone or something like that. I mean, you'll find a way to use up the extra computation.
So will industry giants like Intel that make these chips have to start from scratch to manufacture computers that use light? Will they have to build whole new factories or revamp the ones they have?
So that's, I guess, what's unique about the research that we've done recently. I should say that there's a large field of research trying to figure out how to put optics in the service of microelectronics. And what we've tried to do is figure out a way to build optical devices right inside the existing infrastructure that is used to build microelectronic chips. So basically, we use an existing foundry service where most of the other, or all of the other people sending in designs to a foundry are designing different electronic circuits. And we've basically taken the rules and regulations of this platform and basically bent them a little bit to allow us to build optical devices without making any changes to these processes. And so the power of this is basically that we can integrate optical devices and laser communication into an existing microprocessor without disturbing the 30 years of investment that's gone into fine-tuning the performance of electronics, of the transistor.
So we introduced you as kind of a researcher. It makes it sound sort of academic, but are you basically an inventor? And you're hoping to make your millions and billions on this way to make computers faster in the future?
Well, maybe our students, you know, in some of the other projects in my lab, we work on everything from using these light circuits for exploring quantum mechanics and using radiation pressure and forces of light to do different things. So those are a bit more academic and a little bit more far out. But yeah, this is definitely an application, I guess, in a research direction that's very relevant. And, you know, there are companies like Intel that are very interested in this. In fact, this work, we collaborated with Micron Technology, which is, I guess, a US company that manufactures memory, and they were very interested in trying to figure out how to bring optics into memory chips.
Should I be rooting for this advance or rooting against it? As a typical computer owner, maybe I don't want my computers to get faster and faster. Maybe they're fast enough, and this way they won't go obsolete every couple of years and make me buy a new one.
But they will be cooler.
In temperature as well as in style?
That's right.
Well, maybe Moore's Law is still in effect. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Up next, did you know that Tagalog is one of the most spoken languages in Queens, one of the top 10? Filipino New York is next. Now from Manila in the Philippines to Little Manila here in Queens, New York City. Last week, as the New York City Opera was lowering its curtain, likely for the last time, we happened to notice that the first Filipino opera was about to premiere here. Then we discovered it was Filipino American History Month. Clearly, it's the moment for a primer on the history and the current role of Filipinos in our region. For this, we turn to Filipino American National Historical Society Chapter President Kevin Nadal. He is joined by Linda Oalican. She is co-founder of the Damayan Migrant Workers Association. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
And Linda, for those who don't know the word, Damayan?
Damayan means helping each other.
And it's not particularly related to Filipinos? Is it from the language Tagalog, or
Yes,
what would
it
you
is
say?
a Tagalog word, and yeah, as I've said, it means helping each other. We're Filipino domestic workers trying to support each other so that we can, you know, address the different issues that's challenging our community.
And we'll come back to talk more about the Filipino domestic workers, sometimes here voluntarily, sometimes maybe not so much. But give us a little bit of the prehistory. When did the first Filipino immigrants come to the United States and come to New York?
Well, interestingly enough, a lot of people don't realize that Filipinos have been here in the United States since the 1500s, and that in New York specifically, Filipinos have been here since the early 1900s. A lot of students came here as sponsored students, and they studied at schools like Columbia and NYU in the early 1900s. There were even a few Filipinos that came in through Ellis Island, which a lot of times people don't realize because they they think of mostly European immigrants. And we had a lot of Filipinos that immigrated here post-1965 after the Asian Immigration Act. They allowed Filipinos and other Asian groups to come here in large amounts of numbers. And so we had a large amount that came in during that time.
Usually when immigrants come in waves, there are push factors and pull factors. Pull factors, reasons the United States is drawing them, and push factors, something that's going wrong in the country of origin. Was there something like that in the Philippines for either of those waves?
Yeah, well, in the early 1900s, it was right after the Philippine-American War, and so what you had was the Philippines gaining their independence from Spain and the United States, offering a lot of these students the opportunity to study in the U.S. You know, there were lots of Filipinos there during that time. A lot of them didn't settle. A lot of them returned back to their homeland. But in the 1960s, we had a lot of Filipinos that came in during this time because there was a need for these professional immigrants to come in. So a lot of Filipinos during that time came in as doctors and nurses and engineers. But these days we have Filipinos of all sorts that come to the U.S. We still have the professionals, we still have students, but we also have migrant workers like Linda had talked about before. We have undocumented immigrants that come in here in search of a better life. And, you know, we have a whole gamut of different groups.
And Linda, I think if there's a stereotype of the Filipino immigrant, it is the Filipino nurse. There are many nurses who've come in the last few decades, right?
That's right, yeah.
Why?
Well, for one, there's a big need for the medical profession, especially nurses in the receiving country like the U.S., right? Now, you were talking about the push factor in the Philippines. It's the economic need. Like our country, you know, in the 21st century remains to be very backward agriculturally. There's no basic industrialization. So education there has been attuned to the needs of America. So the U.S. needs nurses, and that's what the Filipinos did. We became nurses, right? But another stereotype among the Filipinos here is a domestic worker. So there are two phases of the Filipina in the U.S., especially in New York.
More skilled and less skilled.
Right.
Did you come as a domestic worker originally?
But yes, I did. Well, I was a tourist, or, you know, I was sponsored. There are many, you know, ways of coming here, and I was sponsored by my family. Others came as tourists, and many just decided to overstay because of the need to work here and send money back home.
And now you work for the rights and decent lives and working conditions for Filipino immigrant domestic workers?
I think, yeah, that's the only way you can get around the problems and the challenges of the community, given the, you know, the lack of services for the immigrant community, even here in NYC. The immigrant groups have decided to self-help, educate, organize, and mobilize so that we can address our different needs and problems.
And
here.
is there a problem at the worst edge with trafficking? Literally, women who are coming here against their will and are in, you know, on some level in servitude? Kevin?
Yeah, well, I mean, trafficking is a big deal or a big problem in our community. Damayan actually does a lot of great work in helping those that are trafficked. Whether it's trafficked as domestic care workers, they don't receive what they were promised when they first came here to the U.S. We also have sex trafficking that is also a huge problem here in the United States, oftentimes because of these stereotypes of Filipino women as being exotic, as being you know, somebody that can fulfill these American men's fantasies and so forth. Oftentimes that they come here against their will, or at least they think that they would have a better opportunity, but it's not what was promised of them.
And so how do you work against those problems? Is it working with law enforcement, the district attorneys, or how?
All of those. Yes. First, we educated our organization about trafficking because traffic workers are very isolated workers. Outreaching them, encouraging them to come out and fight for their rights.
Isolated workers because, in part, they're working in people's homes frequently?
Right, yes. Especially when you're working for a diplomat. The homes of diplomats are not easy to access. Like many domestic workers in diplomats' homes do not know how to, get out of the homes and navigate the streets of New York. They're just not encouraged or sometimes prohibited to do that.
Right.
But-
Oftentimes they don't get vacation times. Oftentimes they don't even allow them to even call their children back at home.
But this is where abuse of domestic workers from the Philippines is taking place in diplomats' homes. These are supposed to be high-level, upstanding people representing the nations of the world, right?
Right.
You would be surprised the types of people that are abusing
Yeah.
our domestic workers. You know, like Linda had said, there's a stereotype that Filipino workers would be obedient, that they're really popular because they speak English well. Filipinos tend to speak English at more proficient rates than people of other Asian groups and other immigrant groups in general. And a lot of times because the economic situation in the Philippines is so bad that they just are looking for a way to come to the United States, not knowing they're going to be abused.
And New York passed a Domestic Workers' Bill of Rights recently,
Correct, yeah.
didn't it?
In 2010, yes.
Does that make a difference?
Well, symbolically, yes. It's a great accomplishment for the domestic workers industry, the very first in the country. But what you can find inside the bill are very minimum. And then, given the condition of the worker as being isolated at the workplace, it's very challenging even to use those minimum provisions as leverage to improve your working conditions. So it's, there's a lot of work to be done, like we have not stopped organizing to fill in the gaps in the Bill of Rights. Right, yeah.
And even this symbolic Bill of Rights that we have in New York is not so easy to get passed in other states. I understand California, which has many more Filipinos than New York does.
Well, they just passed their Bill of Rights.
Oh, they did pass
Yes.
it. Ah, I had
Hawaii
known
also
it was
has a
stuck.
Bill of Rights now. So we have 3 states with a domestic workers' Bill of Rights.
Little Manila. Where is it?
Yeah.
Woodside Queens is probably what most people would refer to as having the most Filipino presence in terms of businesses, restaurants, banks, even population. There are little snippets of Little Manila in other places as well, like in Jamaica Queens, Jackson Heights Queens, even some pockets in Manhattan have a few Filipino businesses.
How many people?
Well, in Woodside, if I do the math, if there are 80,000 Filipinos in New York City, and Woodside has about 1/3 to 2/3, like 1/3 of the population is in Woodside. I don't know what that is. 30,000 people, the Filipinos living in Woodside, approximately.
Is there a tourist Little Manila? So, like, if I take the 7 train to 61st Street Woodside or the Long Island Railroad from Manhattan,
Right.
one stop on any line, Woodside, get off and walk around?
What would you say?
Yeah, you
Six-
stop at
60
69th.
Yeah.
69th Street.
69th at
69th Street.
Crystals. It's a Filipino restaurant. And then you can go down to 61, along that stretch of Roosevelt Avenue from 69 to 61 are Filipino restaurants.
Under the 7 train there,
Right,
Roosevelt
yeah.
Avenue.
You'll-
Filipino restaurant.
You'll find Filipino restaurants next to each other, and they're all making good business. Because many of the Filipinos who live in Woodside do not have their own families here. They're migrant workers, domestic workers like me. Yeah, so on their days off, they just go to the restaurants, pretend that everything is okay, have good meal, listen to music, socialize a little bit, and then go to their usual stuff of buying balikbayan boxes, goods to stuff the box, go to the cargo,
To send
offices
things
to
home.
send things home, and then go to the bank, do their remittances. So many stuff are really going on every day at the Little Manila in Woodside.
So at these restaurants, they make good business, Linda said. What else do they make?
Well, they make amazing food, obviously. You go to these restaurants because you want home cooking. And one thing that is really good about these Filipino restaurants is that they stay pretty authentic to what traditional home cooking is.
Is adobo chicken one of the dishes?
Chicken
Yeah, right.
adobo, pork adobo, pancit, kare-kare. I'm getting a little hungry now, but there are a lot of great dishes.
And what's in there? What defines the spices or the preparation?
Well, pancit is usually rice noodles. It could also be, the mung beans, That's the healthier version
beans,
of the pancit. Yeah. So you put there, the basic garlic, onion, pepper, and some vegetables. Sometimes you put chicken if you can eat meat, or pork. That's very popular even with Americans. And adobo, of course, is chicken with garlic, vinegar, pepper, you know, sometimes, other stuff, because we make fusion. Filipino, we fuse it with American taste.
Asian fusion.
Yeah, in fact, Filipino fusion has become much more popularized. There are a few Filipino restaurants that have become very much well known. Maharlika and Jeepney in Manhattan have both been rated high by the New York Times and the New Yorker. So we think that it will be the next big cuisine is Filipino
And
food.
Thanksgiving is coming up next month. Many different immigrant groups kind of merge traditional culture from their countries of origin with some of the traditional American Thanksgiving dishes. Does that happen with Filipinos?
Absolutely. As a second generation Filipino American, my parents immigrated here to the United States. I thought that was what normal Thanksgivings were, to have a turkey and mashed potatoes and that sort of thing right next to the chicken adobo and the pancit and sometimes if we're lucky, the pork lechon in the middle. But that's very typical as a fusion of Filipino American experience.
For the Filipino immigrants, we're not used to eating turkey. So we have substituted, chicken for turkey. And, cook all the other food, Filipino, American. And the best thing is to get your family and neighbors on the table.
Is there a new wave of immigration now from the violence within the Philippines? There's trouble there, right?
Yeah, well, what we notice is that the immigrants, the rates of immigration have actually decreased in New York for Filipinos in recent years. We were just talking earlier about what some of the causes might be. Definitely think that because it's hard to live in New York, perhaps that might be one reason why Filipino immigrants aren't coming here. So they are still leaving the Philippines because of the economic situation in the Philippines, but they're not necessarily coming to New York anymore. And so I think that it just goes to show
where are they going?
We don't know, but the United States is still the #1 country that they go to, but they might go to places where there are more opportunities for them. Perhaps suburbs might be places that they go.
Because when New York stops attracting immigrants, then we're in trouble.
Absolutely.
Is it the
yes.
cost of housing?
It could be. I would say the cost of housing, I would say job opportunities, that perhaps they're not able to get the jobs. I think that the medical profession tends to be pretty stable, particularly for the nurses, that they're able to get jobs. But for other industries, it might be a little bit more difficult for them.
Is there an agenda for the next mayor, whoever it is, from community organizers?
Well, I do know that Bill DeBlasio did say that he would look out for the Asian Pacific Islander community in New York. He said that at our forum that we had, that was for over, I think there were 80 Asian American organizations that he attended and spoke to us about.
Did you want to add to that?
Right, yes. Yes, we're very excited about, Bill DeBlasio becoming the would-be mayor. And one of our issues for him, I think, is trafficking. Because the Philippines is the #1 supplier of domestic workers for diplomats on A3 and G5 visas.
And the mayor can do something about that?
Well, I hope so, because we have great difficulty accessing this type of workers. For one, they're isolated, so maybe, a word or encouragement from the mayor for these diplomats to, open their doors, be more cooperative, so that organizations like Damayan and law enforcement can have, access to their workers. We're not saying they're doing something bad, but we want their workers to participate in outreaching other workers who might be in, worse situations.
Like in other homes that
Right,
don't
yeah.
have diplomatic immunity from the usual access.
Right.
Last thing, do you know the name Megan Young? She is the first Filipino-American Miss World
Okay.
crowned recently.
I didn't know her name, but I knew who she was.
I know.
Yeah.
Does anybody in you probably remember what she looks like. Does
Yes.
anybody in Woodside care about this kind of thing?
You know, Filipinos are very proud of other Filipinos who do well in the media. And any time that a Filipina wins a beauty pageant or is in the Olympics or accomplishes some great feat, Filipinos are the first to publicize, tell everyone, post on Facebook about how proud that they were. So the day after she had won, that's all I saw on my Facebook newsfeed was how proud they were of having a Filipina Miss World.
Well, thanks for raising a lot of people's awareness here in Filipino History Month.
Right.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate it.
Can high-minded literature like Chekhov, Marquez, or Erdrich make us more empathic, better networkers, or perhaps simply more manipulative? Yes to all of the above, say researchers in today's Public Intellectual, our regular look at research with the power to change public policy, and today, quite literally, our minds. The authors of this new study, published in the journal Science, are David Cummer-Kidd, a PhD candidate, and his professor, Amanuela Castano, from the New School for Social Research. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So it matters what you read, not just that you read?
Yes, I mean, for sure, reading has does a lot of good things for us, and we are not, claiming that we're investigating, all of this. Of course, we focus very specifically on the beneficial effects of reading literary fiction, as compared to other forms of fiction, such as popular fiction or nonfiction in our experiments, and also looking at a very specific outcome in terms of mind reading, or theory of mind, as psychological researchers call it.
State of mind?
Theory of mind.
Uh-huh.
It's a bit of a funny name, but I think we can call it mind reading for our purposes here. It's basically our capacity to infer and represent other people's thoughts and emotions. A very important characteristic in every human interaction. Maybe not everyone, but in many of our interactions.
You want to talk more about what that theory of mind is that you were interpreting or trying to measure in this study?
Absolutely. So one of the tests that we use to assess theory of mind is called the Reading the Mind in the Eyes test. And it was developed by a team of researchers in England led by Simon Baron-Cohen. And what the test is composed of is 36 items, and they're all photographs of just people's eyes as these people are expressing emotions. And the participant's job is to choose the closest of 4 possible emotion terms to match with the expression in the person's eyes. So in that sense, it's a difficult test, but it gives us a very good indication of directly how good people are doing when they're trying to understand other people's emotions.
And you compared how the eyes looked after reading certain kinds of literature compared to other kinds of literature?
No, we looked at the performance that people had on this test, how many good guesses, correct guesses they got out of these 36 trials, depending on whether they had been asked to read literary fiction, popular fiction, or no reading at all.
So you were testing people's ability to read other people through their eyes.
Yes. Yes.
And what kinds of books qualified as literary fiction?
You want to get into this?
Sure.
Yes.
So we attempted to theoretically define literary fiction very loosely because it's difficult to decide exactly what is literary, and we can't give a number value to it. This is 74.23 literary.
It's a hard study to quantify.
It's very difficult to quantify. So what we did is we relied on expert judges, which is something that is done often in research when it's difficult to quantify something. So when we were looking at literary fiction, we took either excerpts of novels that were finalists for the National Book Award for Fiction, I should say finalists or winners, or we took short stories from an anthology of the 2012 Penn O'Henry Prize for Short Fiction. And we compared these with either short stories that were included in an anthology of popular fiction, so short stories by people like Robert Heinlein or Rosamund Pilcher, and so those were our comparison groups. And it allowed us to get an idea of maybe not precisely how literary these works were, but we feel confident that the literary texts have relatively more literary merit than the popular fiction texts.
And how did you actually do the study? Did you have people read for a half hour and then look somebody in the eye and try to read their minds?
That's basically exactly what we did.
Really?
We had them read not for quite half an hour. Most of the texts were 10 to 12 pages, and of course people read for different amounts of time. But for the most part, people were spending 15, 20 minutes reading the texts. And to us, this was very encouraging, because to find a significant, statistically significant effect after such a short manipulation, we didn't have people read War and Peace and then assess them. So this gives us confidence.
What did they read?
So, for example, they read, in some cases, excerpts from the first chapter of novels. This was in one of our experiments. And we just took the first 10 to 12 pages without cutting readers off in the middle of a paragraph. Or we had them read short stories. So to give an example of a literary short story, a great short story, Corey, by Alice Munro, a writer many of us will recognize, and we compare that to, say, a short story, Space Jockey, by Robert Heinlein, as an example of genre fiction.
And then they would try to read the eyes of what? The same person who was working with you and was there specifically to try to convey a certain state of mind?
No, there was no other person present, but they, all these were presented through a software, and so they were presented with a series of faces. And as David said before, in one of these, we used different measures of theory of mind to try to make sure that it was not specific to one measure. But the one that we used in 4 out of the 5 experiments is called Read the Mind in the Eyes test. Presents just a slice of people's eyes and a bit of a nose, 36 of them, one after the other. And they were given 4 options, and they had to decide which one was correct. And so that's what the task that they engaged in after having read for about 10 minutes.
That makes more sense. Using the images, you can keep it constant.
Exactly. Everybody saw exactly the same.
So what do you think accounts for the difference? What was it that people were reading in these great works of literature that raise their empathic potential?
Well, the rationale behind this study is that obviously builds on the difference and on the specificity of literary fiction. And one of the main factors we think contributes to this is the fact that the way in which characters are depicted in different kinds of fiction. Specifically, we thought that popular fiction tends to focus more on the plot and less on the mind of the characters. And characters, although it's not true for every work of fiction, of course, of popular fiction, they're usually depicted in a more stereotyped, simple manner. In literary fiction, we argue that characters are more complex and they're not explained fully by the author. The author, a good literary fiction writer, engages the reader in what we call the construction of the mind of the character. So you're forced to engage with it and try to guess the intentions, the motivations, the emotions, and the thoughts of these characters, which is exactly the kind of processes that are measured by our theory of mind tasks subsequently.
Did this even work on men, making them more empathic?
It did. And one of the things, we found no gender differences in our research. So literature is for everybody, not just men or for women. And we also found that people's level of education coming into the study, how familiar people were with fiction in general coming into the study, also didn't affect the results. So it does seem that anybody can pick up a work of literary fiction, and generally, on average, they will show an improvement in theory of mind.
And income or any other socioeconomic differences in the subjects, or do they all tend to come from a similar background?
We did not have specifically data on socioeconomic differences, but we had a wide range of age, from about 18 to 75. Right.
Now, this measures the ability to understand the eyes and what the person is communicating through their eyes. It doesn't necessarily, if I'm reading you right, mean that they're nicer with people or more empathic. They could use it to be manipulative, right?
Conceivably, yes. And we didn't assess empathy, and so we don't want to say that it makes people more empathetic. And we certainly don't want to say that it makes people more manipulative, but we simply do not have the data currently to come down on one side or the other. But it is true, and we want to be careful about that, that theory of mind as a psychological construct is quite distinct from empathy. But we suspect that having access to how other people are feeling and being attuned to it, for most of us, is likely to make us feel more empathic towards them.
Why are you studying this? What do you hope to actually change?
Well, I'm a social psychologist. I've been working on, I've been interested in psychological process of perception and behavior for many years. And when David joined our program a few years ago with his background in literature, we thought that it was a very good occasion to study something positive. You know, a lot of my work has been, for instance, on the humanization of enemies and on how we justify violence against them. More recently, I've been working on empathy and how usually helps us, it negatively correlates with antisocial behavior. And that's, I think, what you're referring to. And so this theory of mind work is a bit of an extension of it, with the great contribution of David of bringing literature and how this can impact on us. As you mentioned before, and as David also commented upon, theory of mind, we think, is a building block of empathy. We are to be able to understand what people are feeling in order to have an appropriate response. It's no guarantee they will respond appropriately in a pro-social way, but it's more likely than not.
So should the Pentagon drop on Iran volumes and volumes of National Book Award winners, or maybe on the House of Representatives?
I would start with the House of Representatives.
Maybe they should drop them softly. It's the only thing we might say.
What unanswered questions did you come up with, or maybe new questions, as a result of the study that maybe you hope to research next?
So many. One thing we would like to know is how long-lasting are these effects, and can we measure them over time? What does something like studying the humanities do to your mind? Another thing we would like to look at are other forms of art and fiction, such as plays, film, movies, and also even paintings. One of our broader goals is to understand our cultural environment and to really understand how these things that we engage with on a daily basis affect our psychology and affect how we view other people. And we certainly spend a lot of our time immersed in fiction, but currently psychologists have only a limited understanding of fiction's real role in our lives. So especially now as we debate the importance of teaching literature in schools, or whether or not we can support libraries, we hope to have a better understanding of exactly what we're cutting before we cut it.
Of course, it's only relatively elites who read this kind of literary fiction anyway. Are you also measuring more popular forms of reading, maybe social media, Twitter versus Facebook, television versus various things on the web, whatever? You know, since that's how so many people get their literature, of, if you can call 140 characters literature.
Right. We haven't looked at this yet, and we have a full agenda for the next 20 years already, so we may not get to that. But there are other people who have started working on the impact of Facebook and other social media on psychological processes and on social behavior and so on. So there's a big community of researchers out there trying to understand this phenomenon already, and we're just contributing to this.
Well, this has been so interesting. Thank you very much for sharing it with us.
Thanks for having us.
On a bluff just above the Great Falls in Paterson, New Jersey, you will find a ruin with a history. Hinchliffe Stadium was home to the New York Black Yankees of the old Negro Leagues, also to the New York Cubans. A grand 10,000-seat stadium, it was built in the depths of the Depression as a general recreation facility and turned out to be a make-work project for laid-off mill workers. Can the stadium be restored is the question today, and should it be? Joining us, journalist Garrett McGrath. We were reminded of Hinchliffe Stadium from his piece in Narratively, the online journal that specializes in news that is not breaking. And joining us as well via Skype from Kansas City, the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Bob Kendrick. Welcome to both of you. And Bob, stand by for just a minute. We'll get right to you. But Garrett, you're going to introduce us a little bit to Hinchliffe Stadium. So tell us about this first image that I think we're going to put right up on the screen here.
So this is the west ticket entrance. As you can see, it has this Art Deco and mission style combination. This is the original stadium being built in 1933.
And I heard that Frederick Law Olmsted's sons, Law Olmsted, who designed Central Park, his sons were involved in designing this?
Yes, they did the initial layout of the area when it was first a football field in 1930, and then another local architect helped update and build the eventual stadium in 33.
So the iron gate there and the two little windows on the left?
Yes.
Pre-ticket master?
And it was not segregated ticketing or seating, which I thought was fascinating for being in the 1930s.
So, Bob, let me bring you in right on that point. Are you familiar enough with this stadium and its history to know if mixed crowds came to watch the games there?
Well, yeah, that was actually, believe it or not, very commonplace for Negro League games. It was a fairly significant white fan base, and in most of those stadiums, and the exception might be the Deep South. In Birmingham, we weren't going to sit together, and under no circumstances.
I hear you.
During that era. But here in Kansas City, that was pretty commonplace for black and white fans to be there to watch those games. And certainly as you moved into the Eastern Seaboard, Yankee Stadium, and some of the other great stadiums that they played, Hinchliffe being one, that was fairly common to see. Those Negro League games were oftentimes played before a mixed race audience who sat side by side enjoying, truthfully, the best baseball being played in this country, and certainly the most exciting brand of baseball being played in this country.
And it wasn't as easy as it was today to get from, as it is today, to get from Paterson to the Bronx. So there was another incentive. So Garrett, let's go to slide number 2. Are we taking a hike in the woods, or are we in the grandstand?
This is in the grandstand. On the left of the photo, that's Brian Lopinto. He's the president of the Hinchliffe Friends, the Friends of Hinchliffe Society. He actually gave me the tour that day, and he's been involved in saving the stadium for over a decade at this point. A lot of the preservation effort has been spearheaded by him, a lot of people from the local community too. But yes, this is the stands on the third base line, kind of behind home plate, and it's at that stage right now.
It looks like it needs a little better maintenance.
A lot of it in maintenance. Yeah.
And in a minute, we're going to see a wide shot of the whole stadium. But Bob, you can't see the slide of Brian Lopinto there, but he's wearing a number 14 jersey. Any idea who that might be?
And it's a 14 for which team?
The Cleveland Indians.
Oh, he's wearing a Cleveland Indian jersey.
Sorry,
Well,
I was guessing that was either Black Yankees or the
Oh no,
Cubans.
it's actually Larry Dobies' jersey.
Larry Doby,
when
absolutely.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Who came from the Negro Leagues, actually locally.
Was he the first American League player?
First American League player.
Who was
Yes,
black?
he was.
Who was black, yes. And he was actually from Newark. And he auditioned, or he tried out, I think, for the New York Black Yankees at Hinchliffe and didn't make the team in like the early 1930s. But then
Which
he
is
played.
absolutely crazy to think that Dobie didn't make the team, because Dobie, number one of the greatest athletes ever, and certainly was a tremendous baseball player.
And some guys come on late. I've been surprised watching the major leagues this year how many 30-year-old rookies there are making an impact on some of these playoff teams. So let's go to slide number 3. This is that wide shot.
Yes, this is the wide shot, so you can see the horseshoe design. It looks, if you've ever seen a historic photo of Polo Grounds, it looks almost a dead ringer for it. The trees that you saw in the background of the last shot where Brian's walking into are directly on the right.
Yes.
So a lot of the ticket area is kind of to the center, the right center of the photo. And then it's a grandstands that would wrap around the entire infield. The infield in place there now is not in the same location where it was. It used to be square to the bottom. So home plate would be to the upper right hand, like the part all the way to the right on the field. They actually moved the diamond. High school sports actually populated the stadium afterwards.
And so from the daytime shot to what it might have looked like during a night game.
Yes, this is actually from a 1934 motorcycle rally, because this was a multi-purpose space. But you can see how it's packed, and a lot of people are there enjoying whatever spectacles they had to put on.
They had motorcycle rallies in 1934.
Yes, and midget car racing. And they actually, for the first event to ever happen there was in 1930. It was the local Thanksgiving Day high school football game. It was the 2 local high schools, and 12,000 people. The stadium was built all on stands and standing to watch the game.
Wow, Bob, that's depressing. That means football was starting to overtake baseball even in 1930.
That is impressive.
Now we're going to see where this is in Paterson, for some of you who know the city. Give us a little context here, Garrett.
So that's the Passaic River flowing from right to left, and the Great Falls are in the left bottom-hand part of the screen.
And if people know anything about Paterson who aren't from Paterson, it's the Great Falls.
Yes, of course. And the Great Falls are like, you know, you park where you park your car to go visit the Great Falls is directly next to the stadium.
Bob, who else are some of the great players who might have played in this stadium in the era that we're talking about?
Well, when we're talking about, again, those 30s into the 40s, there were any number of stars who would have played there at Hinchliffe. And interesting that you mentioned Paterson, because that is where Larry Doby lived, was in Paterson, New Jersey. And so, but, you know, Monty Irvin and guys like that who would have played in that stadium, Monty Irvin being from that part of the country as well, great Newark Eagle, could have been the first black player to play in the major leagues, was actually approached before Jackie Robinson was, and had just gotten back from World War II and was kind of going through a little bit of contract squabbles with Effa Manley, who owned the Newark Eagles. And so he declined the opportunity. Branch Rickey then went to Jackie Robinson to become baseball's chosen one. But Monty Irvin had that same pedigree that Jackie did. And truth of the matter is, he was a better baseball player than Jackie was at that time. Jackie turned himself into a Hall of Fame baseball player. Monty Irvin was a superstar in the Negro Leagues, one of the finest baseball players in the Negro Leagues at that time, one of the finest baseball players in the world at that particular time. By the time he gets to the major leagues, he's a little bit older, and so he didn't have the lengthy major league career, but Monty Irvin was outstanding. Likely Minnie Minoso, guys like that who played there as well, and the great Minnie Minoso is still with us. You know, and we're all hoping that Minnie gets in the Hall of Fame at some point in time while we still have him. But yeah, any number of great stars from the Negro Leagues would have played at Hinchliffe over some period of time during the stadium's operations.
And I've always thought, since you brought up Jackie Robinson, that it was a little bit lucky that he became as great as he was in the major leagues, and really was by anybody's standards a Hall of Fame baseball player, not somebody simply who made history, because you never really know about talent. Somebody who's great coming up at whatever level might not work out in the bigs.
Well, to put it in proper perspective, baseball was Jackie's weakest sport. You know, he's a four-sport star at UCLA, but he was a much better basketball, football, and track man than he was baseball player. And of course, he spends his real rookie season here in Kansas City in 1945 with the great Kansas City Monarchs. And that's where he really learned how to play the game. And so he turned himself into a great baseball player. You know, Jackie was tenacious. He had a tremendous work ethic. But when he was playing with the Monarchs, he wasn't the best player in the Negro Leagues at that time, and likely not the best player on the Kansas City Monarchs, which is, again, no disparagingness to Robinson whatsoever, because it just, I think, speaks to the talent that was there in the Negro Leagues. And again, you're right, he seemed to be in the right place at the right time. In 1945, the Monarchs were not their customary great team. They were a really good team, and Jackie contributed greatly on that 45 team. But the Monarchs superstars were still serving in World War II. My dear friend, the late, great John Buck O'Neill, who was a great first baseman for the Monarchs, was in the Navy. Willard Brown, who's a Hall of Famer, patrolled the outfield for the Monarchs, was in the Army. Hank Thompson, who would integrate two Major League Baseball teams with the St. Louis Browns and then later the New York Giants. He's also in the Army. Ted Strong, who was a multifaceted 6'4", 6'5" athlete, could play every position. He's in the Army. If the Monarchs have their full contingent of star players, it might have been difficult for Robinson to make that team. And so as fate has it, these guys were then serving in the military. Robinson joins the Monarchs, discovered by Branch Rickey. Rickey rolls the dice. Robinson pays off in ways in which we can't even imagine.
And great for the cause of,
off the field.
it paid off for the cause of equality that the first one through was so good.
Yeah.
Let's go to another slide of Hinchliffe Stadium. By the way, who is Hinchliffe?
He was Mayor John Hinchliffe, who in 1930 got the bond together in Paterson, New Jersey, to build the stadium.
So this is a poster for a game?
Yes, the Black Yankees versus the Birmingham Black Barons, who Willie Mays actually played for in 1948 and 1949 for the Birmingham Black Barons, and then Satchel Page pitched for them from 27 to 1930.
This was in the day before scientists discovered graphic design, I think.
Yes, of course. Just get all the information up there, and they would come.
Bob, what?
What year is that game posted? Does it say?
It doesn't say, and I'm not sure actually what year that's from.
That's outstanding, though.
Yeah.
But Bob, it's rare, it was rare at that time that a team in the Negro Leagues even had a home stadium per se, wasn't it?
Well, you know, it was, but it wasn't, because what you had was, say, for instance, in Memphis, where the Martin brothers built their own stadium. In Pittsburgh, Gus Greenlee built his own stadium. But, you know, here in Kansas City, they played at Muehlebach Stadium and later Blues Stadium, where the Yankees farm team played. And so they were oftentimes playing in a lot of the same stadiums that Major League Baseball teams were playing in. And so in Chicago, the Chicago American Giants played at Old Comiskey Park. And so they were filling up those same ballparks that many Major League teams were playing in. And truth of the matter is they were actually outdrawing many of those Major League teams.
So there's an issue now, Garrett, as to what to do with the stadium. There's some kind of law protecting it, but only to a point. Is that where we are?
So in 1997, the high school actually occupied the space until 1997, using it for sporting events and the like. And the Paterson local government wanted to actually demolish the building. And Brian Lapinto saw an article about it, and he has a tie because he played baseball there. He saw it and he said, why would they let something like this just be destroyed? And so since that time, since about 2002, pushed very hard, has gotten some things passed, but a lot of the things kind of are a step forward, but 2 steps back.
It did get put on the National Register of Historic Places in 2004, correct?
Yes, but that turned out to actually be more of a misstep than initially thought. It was given local significance. Well, it's the National Register of Historic Places, and it was given the designation local significance. They got the registration in order to apply for this grant that no longer exists, called the Save America's Treasures grant. It would have been $1 million to just start the work. But because it was given local significance and not national significance, it eliminated itself from the designation.
But they can't knock it down?
No, and they have actually, I believe on the 24th of September, just very recently, Paterson approved, they accepted bids for contractual work, and they accepted a bid for, I believe, $338,000 to actually but to prevent the decay, to attract investors and people to come in and help save the stadium.
And what does Brian Lapinto or anybody else want, ideally?
I think to go back to kind of that multi-use space, to have the local high schools use it. Yeah, that's Brian right there. To have the high schools use it, to have fairs come in. The big organization they're courting right now is the New Jersey Hall of Fame, which sadly exists on a mobile trailer, but they want to give it a permanent home there to honor all the great New Jerseyans of history, of course.
From Major League Baseball?
Oh, no, just the New Jersey Hall, like Bruce Springsteen is in it, like the New Jersey Hall of Fame.
The general New Jersey Hall of Fame.
Yes, it exists in a trailer that they tour to schools, but they want to give it a permanent home, and I believe the New Jersey Hall of Fame is interested in occupying a part of the space.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Remember the big controversy a few years ago, should John Bon Jovi be allowed in? So, Bob, what are we really preserving when we preserve a stadium like this, or the Negro Leagues Hall of Fame that you're the president of in Kansas City? Or museum, forgive me, museum.
No. We're saving a piece of Americana. You know, it's about baseball, but baseball, particularly as we talk about the Negro Leagues, is merely a premise for a much grandiose story. You know, guys, this is the story of America at her worst, but it's also the story of America at her triumphant best. And it's such a wonderful piece of American history that for years and years and years, no one really knew anything about this history. And when we delve into this, when we look at the story of the Negro Leagues and its scope, its depth, its magnitude, it plays such a pivotal role in the social advancement of our country. it themes around social advancement, leadership, economic empowerment, and yet it is a story that has miraculously escaped the pages of American history books. So your efforts there to not only save something that is a very pertinent part of New Jersey's history, but it also represents, again, a piece of that fabric of our country known as the Negro Leagues. And so we certainly commend all of those who are working so vigilantly on that project to save that historic ballpark and to preserve that heritage and that history and to find ways to share that history with our young people. You know, that's what we do every day here in Kansas City at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum.
So Garrett, 15 seconds left. Can people just go there and throw a ball around on the field or walk around the stands such as they are?
Yes, currently they can. And I think the big effort now is to kind of get this ball rolling because for 10 years it's been a lot of ups and downs.
Thank you very much. Bob, thank you for joining us from Kansas City.
Guys, thanks for having me.
And that's our program for this week. We debut a show at this time each Wednesday. Next week for Fixing the Big Stuff like poverty and housing, does it really matter who's the mayor? And tune into my radio program weekdays 10 a.m. till noon on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Tomorrow, our pre-election series, 30 Issues in 30 Days, continues with public sector pensions, how big a problem for the next mayor. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for watching.